Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, let's go ahead and get started today. So, we're going to start with Act 1, Scene 1. And just a few things before we get started. I cannot upload videos more than, I believe it's like 16 minutes in length. So, you may hear my timer go off, which is just telling me that I have to stop it and there'll be a continuation video. I am going to do my best to end at a stopping point, not just randomly throughout like the middle of a slide. But just keep in mind, so when I say we will talk at the end about how to best prepare for the test, that doesn't necessarily mean at the end of this video. It may be at the end of this act. And it all depends on how fast I can get going and finish through these slides. So, also, you don't need to listen to this in its entirety from start to finish. You can pause it and especially rewind if you need to, take breaks, whatever. If you want to sit down and finish all of it, doesn't matter to me, whatever is best for you. So you're going to see on the screen, you're going to see the answers to the study guide questions that you've been working on for a while now. We're going to start obviously at the beginning, Act 1, Scene 1, and we're going to make our way all the way through to the end of Act 2. And by the end of Act 2, that's when we'll have our test review, talking about how you can better prepare yourself for the test on either Monday or Tuesday, depending on what days we meet. Okay? I will also be going back and forth from this PowerPoint to the one from the beginning of class when we talked about the introduction to Shakespeare. You should have this one listed in your saved files. It was posted on Portal. It was part of the assignment to go ahead and fill in these blanks, but especially this plot page that we're talking about here, the Shakespearean tragedy plot format. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. So we have how does Shakespeare start to play so that he gains the attention of the groundlings? So in order to answer this question, we have to first know what it is, in fact, a groundling. What is this word? And again, it's back in that PowerPoint that I was just at with the plot format. But the groundlings were the lowest of the low class. And they were this rude and rowdy bunch that were stuck literally in the dirt at the floor of the stage. It's also important to keep in mind, how did society view plays during this time? Nowadays, we view plays and drama as a very beautiful and elegant form of art, whereas during this time, play and playwrights themselves were viewed as the crude and classless form of art, whereas the upper class attended operas because that's where their elegance were displayed. Okay, so in order to get the groundlings' attention, with all that in mind, Shakespeare used his characters, these servants, to start with puns and crude jokes, which got the groundlings' attention to kind of settle in and laugh and pay attention to what was being said. On top of that, we talked about how Shakespeare was a master at identifying characters and character traits, as well as setting in more ways than just listing them for the reader. It doesn't do it justice if Shakespeare were to just come out and say the Capulets and the Montagues were two families and they hated each other, right? But the way that Act 1, especially here in the beginning with Scene 1, where the characters and these families are going at each other's throats and they have this hatred is on display through the insults and the language that's used amongst these characters, it really paints a picture for the audience and the reader or viewer to view how much these families actually disliked each other. Keep in mind that during this time there weren't any props on the stage, so it wasn't as if the reader themselves knew if it was daylight or night, or if the scene changed or the location changed. Shakespeare had to make this known through the dialogue of characters or the actions of characters. Same approach here, that Shakespeare painted a picture for the audience or the viewer through the actions and dialogue of his characters. It's very important to keep in mind that Shakespeare was the master at doing that. That's what makes Shakespeare's writing so powerful, is that it was so detailed and creative that it drew the reader in, and it really piqued their interest. Okay, Gregory and Samson, these lines here on 38 and 41, again in Act 1, Scene 1, what does it tell us about their characters? Right? Well, it says that they don't want to get in trouble, right? But they still wanted that action to take place. They wanted the fight to break out. They wanted, I don't want to necessarily say they wanted someone to get in trouble. They just wanted the action to take place, but they themselves didn't want to get in trouble. Some could say this is a cowardly act. Some could also say this is pretty wise on their part to try to figure out a way to get a reaction without themselves being the culprit or viewed as the reason behind it and actually breaking the law themselves. It's important to keep in mind that in everything we're reading, we're looking for the why. That's as we move up in our education, as we become critical thinkers, it's important we ask ourselves why something is there or why something is the way it is, and not just what is it on the page, right? It's important to ask ourselves why. And so Tybalt is a very important character, but a very unique character, right? Especially here on why he is so dangerous, right? He claims to hate peace as much as he hates the Montagues. And keep in mind, Shakespeare was very keen on foreshadowing the future. So what could this foreshadow to in our story? He claims to hate peace as much as he hates this family. Does that mean, possibly, that he would in fact deliberately do something that would destroy a resolution to the families because he hates peace so much as he claims? Something to keep in mind, something to keep note of. As we go through this, it's important that you keep your novels with you, so you have your annotations as well as a notebook in hand. If you want to look at your answers and see if you got it right, if you got it wrong, obviously make the changes as necessary. So definitely do that. And like I said, if you need to pause at any time, go ahead and feel free. The wives on both families. So you have Lady Capulet and Lady Montague. And how did they respond to their husbands? Right? They both tried to stop their husbands from fighting violently. They both display their disagreements necessarily of this feud leading to a altercation. Okay. The prince. Okay, what warning does the prince give to the street brawlers in scene 1, lines 82 through 104, right? He displays that he is completely fed up with this feud as well as the violence that is poured out into the streets, and he therefore claims that any fights or brawls, right, between the two families will lead to punishment, right? And this punishment will be killed, right? That's the punishment, is death. And so it leads back to that Gregory Samson. They don't want to break the law, right? And you have a reason why. And the reason that you may say this seems a bit extreme, that fighting would lead is punishment by death, but the excuse here is the prince says this has gone on for far too long and has gotten out of hand. Both sides have taken it too far, and the only way to resolve it is by making this very, very steep punishment. And then we are introduced to Romeo here at this point, and he seems to be acting strangely, right? He is described as pacing amongst the trees and seems melancholy. And I implore you to define that word on your own, and if you can't, look it up in the dictionary, give it a quick Google, it's worth a Google, and use that definition to try to paint an image in your head on what you think Romeo actually is doing in this scene. back to the foreshadowing here, and even more importantly, an example of irony. So Romeo, in lines 165 through 169, identifies that he is in love with Rosaline, and who does not love him back, right? And so we'll learn who Rosaline is in the next scene, but it's important that we know that he is in love with her. She does not love him back, or so he claims. He is in love with her, and it's very important. In the next couple of questions, it's going to ask us how does he describe Rosaline, and we'll get into that more in the next question. We're going to jump down to number 9 just because I was talking about it. Why does Romeo say he does not want to look at other women? In lines 237, right? He says he has never seen someone as beautiful as Rosaline. And this is an example of irony, because he is saying one thing, yet the opposite is going to happen. And it's almost a form of, it very well is a form of dramatic irony, because the audience knows this story is about the love between Romeo and Juliet, not Romeo and Rosaline. So when he says he is in love with Rosaline and that he has never seen someone as beautiful as her, we know that is not how this story goes. This is not how this story is going to end. And in fact, it is going to be Juliet he is going to be saying these things about in a very short time. Okay, we'll go back to number 9 here. An oxymoron is a figure of speech that combines two contradictory elements, such as deafening silence. Okay, you're asked to list 4 of these in the lines 177 to 182. Now, we don't necessarily have to go through these individually, but what is important about this is that you know what that word oxymoron means, how to define it, as well as how to identify it. That is the key to literary devices. Knowing what something is and being able to identify it is a completely different thing. So if you see it in a line, it's important that you identify it. The more and more you do this, the better you the better you're gonna get at being able to identify it in the future. And according to Romeo, why does this love he has for Rosaline, why does it not blossom into a relationship? Well, he says that Rosaline refuses to love him back because she has vowed to be that she vows to not marry anyone, right? In today's day and age, that may seem a little out of the norm, right? People look for love. That's what human beings typically do, not necessarily everyone, right? But you can look at a priest or even a nun, right? Where they vow themselves to God that they will not marry someone because they devote themselves to a higher calling. And that could be the situation here. Not saying that she's going to be a nun, but that is what she says as to why she does not love him back, right? She vows to not marry anyone. She vows to be alone. Let's see the time here. We got 13 minutes, so we'll go ahead and just stop it here, and we'll start with scene 2 in the next video.